The email was short, almost insulting in its simplicity. "We've decided to go in a different direction for this leadership role. While we appreciate your years of dedication, we're looking for someone with more longevity." Longevity. That was the word they chose. I sat staring at the screen in my dimly lit office long after everyone else had gone home. I'd been with this company for nearly 2 decades, through acquisitions, downturns, late-night fire drills, and impossible deadlines. I'd mentored half the rising stars now climbing the ladder. I had the results, the loyalty, the track record. What I didn't have, apparently, was youth. In their eyes, I was too old. They never said it outright, of course. They wrapped it in careful HR-approved language about fresh perspectives and energy. But I knew what they meant. I saw the way the new VP, barely out of his 30s, looked at me like I was a relic. I heard the whispers when I chose to stay in the office, while others went out for happy hour. I watched promotions go to people with fewer years, fewer achievements, but shinier LinkedIn profiles. And now it was official. They didn't see me as a leader. They saw me as replaceable. I closed the email and leaned back, feeling the weight of it settle in my chest. For a moment, I thought of all the birthdays I'd missed with my kids, all the nights I'd worked through dinner, all the weekends. I'd carried my laptop to soccer games, telling myself it would pay off in the long run. This was supposed to be the payoff. The corner office, the recognition, the seat at the table. Instead, I was being quietly shuffled toward irrelevance. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It has a way of lighting a fire in places you didn't know were still alive. That night, driving home, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even tell my husband what had happened. Instead, I sat in silence at a red light watching the glow reflect on the windshield and thought, if they think I'm finished, they have no idea who they're dealing with. Because yes, I was older. I had more years behind me than the 20-somethings pitching ideas in hoodies and sneakers. But that also meant I had scars. I had history. I had seen companies rise and fall, fads come and go, markets shift overnight. I had something no fresh perspective could replace: experience. An experience, when sharpened by anger and purpose, is a weapon. So while they toasted the new leadership team at the bar that night, I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started sketching. Not a resignation letter, not a revenge fantasy, a blueprint for something that would outlast them. They thought I was too old to lead, too irrelevant to promote, too expendable to matter. They had no idea that one day soon I'd be signing papers that would make me their boss. And the best part, I wouldn't need their seat at the table. I'd own the table. The signs had been there long before the email. I'd sit in meetings where my suggestions would be met with polite nods, only to hear the same idea repeated 10 minutes later by a younger colleague, and suddenly it was brilliant. I'd proposed the strategies rooted in hard data, years of trial and error, and the scars of past product flops, only to be told they wanted something edgier. Translation: they wanted something shinier, newer, preferably packaged by someone who didn't remember what dial-up internet sounded like. The office had become a shrine to youth. The break room fridge was stocked with kombucha and energy drinks. Casual Friday had quietly become casual every day, and if you weren't wearing sneakers and a hoodie, you looked like you didn't belong. The CEO bragged about how nimble we were becoming, which was really code for hiring younger, cheaper talent who could work long hours without asking questions about health insurance or retirement plans. And slowly the older faces disappeared. One by one, the people I'd started with either retired early, were pushed out, or found themselves restructured. In their place came an army of bright-eyed 20-somethings with TikTok accounts and buzzwords I had to Google just to keep up. I didn't resent them. I remembered being that hungry once, but I resented how the company treated the rest of us as if experience were a liability instead of an asset. The favoritism was blatant. Younger staff were invited to brainstorm dinners while I was asked to hold down the fort in the office. Leadership roles were given to people who had mastered the art of looking innovative, even if they couldn't handle the messy details that followed. And whenever something went wrong, suddenly I was the one asked to quietly fix it in the background. It stung most when they hired the new VP, 35 charismatic, with a resume that looked more impressive on paper than in practice. Within weeks, he was the golden boy handshakes in the hallway, private lunches with the CEO, his face splashed across company newsletters. Meanwhile, I was still the one in the trenches making sure the ship didn't sink. I remember one moment in particular. A major client had threatened to walk after a disastrous presentation the VP botched. Who stayed late to salvage the account, rebuild the deck, and calm the client's nerves? Me. Who got praised in the Monday meeting him for having the vision to win the client back? That was the story of my career there. I carried the weight and someone else got the credit. Still, I kept telling myself it would pay off. That eventually loyalty and results would matter more than image. That eventually the people making decisions would remember who had been there through the tough years, the late nights, the near failures. But when that email hit my inbox, when they told me they wanted more longevity, I realized the truth: it was never going to be me. I wasn't overlooked because I lacked ability. I was overlooked because I reminded them of the one thing they feared most, that one day they'd be me. And that was a truth they couldn't reward. The official announcement came on a Wednesday morning. I walked into the office to find balloons tied to the conference room chairs, trays of pastries, and a banner on the big screen that read, "Congratulations, Jason Jason." The 35-year-old VP, the golden boy, the one whose big claim to fame was botching a presentation I had saved behind the scenes. He was being promoted into the role I'd quietly been told I was a strong candidate for. The role I'd been preparing for years. The role I'd given up family dinners, vacations, and sleep for. And now it belonged to him. I stood there in the doorway, invisible. People clapped, cheered, snapped pictures for the company intranet. Jason shook hands with the CEO, who said something about fresh energy for a new era. My stomach dropped when I realized those were the exact words I'd read in that email: more longevity, fresh energy. They hadn't just rejected me, they'd replaced me. When Jason stepped up to the mic, his voice rang out with rehearsed humility. "I'm honored," he said, grinning like a man who'd already been practicing his acceptance speech for weeks. "I look forward to leading this incredible team into the future. Into the future." Another jab, subtle but sharp. I watched him glance toward me just for a second. A flicker of something in his eyes, smugness, maybe pity. As if he knew this promotion was supposed to be mine, but he wasn't sorry. He was proud. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't move. My legs were lead. My heart pounded in my chest like it was trying to break free. In that moment, a reel played in my head, my first day at the company, nervously clutching a coffee cup. The late nights staying until the cleaning crew turned off the lights. The client deals I'd saved. The product launches I'd shepherded through disaster. The birthdays I'd missed. Every sacrifice, every ounce of loyalty suddenly felt meaningless. Because in the end, all they saw when they looked at me was an expiration date. After the applause died down, after the crowd dispersed, I went back to my desk. My computer screen blinked with unread emails, but I couldn't bring myself to touch the keyboard. For the first time in 20 years, I felt like a stranger in the place I had practically built with my own hands. That was the moment, the point of no return. Something broke inside me, but in the best possible way. The illusion shattered. The idea that loyalty would be rewarded, that hard work guaranteed security, that age equaled irrelevance. I saw through it all. And I knew I couldn't keep playing their game. I remember sitting there staring at the gray office walls and whispering to myself, if they won't let me lead here, I'll build something they can't ignore. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was clarity. They thought they'd buried me under that promotion. They had no idea they'd just planted the seed of their own undoing. And when it grew, it would swallow them whole. I didn't storm out. I didn't slam a resignation letter on anyone's desk. That's what they expected me to do, fade out quietly, or leave in a blaze of bitterness. Instead, I smiled through meetings, took notes like always, and played the role of the loyal veteran who accepted her place. But beneath the surface, something else was happening. At night, after putting my kids to bed, I'd sit at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my notebook spread out. I wasn't answering company emails anymore. I was sketching wireframes, drafting business plans, running numbers, until my eyes blurred. Every ounce of frustration that came from being passed over was poured into a new blueprint, my blueprint. The idea had been living in the back of my mind for years. A product I'd pitched internally a dozen times, only to be told it was too ambitious or not aligned with current priorities. Translation, they didn't want to take the risk. But I believed in it. I'd watched the market shift, the technology evolve, and I knew it was only a matter of time before someone seized the opportunity. If they weren't willing, then I would. During the day, I became an observer. I watched how decisions were made, who held the real power where the weaknesses were. I listened to clients complain about what they wished our product could do, and I filed those comments away. I noted every frustration employees whispered over coffee. Those pain points would become my company's edge. I started reaching out to people quietly too, not with job offers yet, but with conversations. Former colleagues who'd left in frustration. Engineers, I trusted ones who knew my work ethic and didn't need flashy titles to follow me. Investors I'd met years ago at conferences, the ones who always asked why I hadn't struck out on my own. I didn't pitch anything concrete, but I planted seeds. Casual questions, hypothetical scenarios, little breadcrumbs that hinted at a bigger plan. No one at the company suspected a thing. If anything, they thought I was finally settling into the role of support player. They dumped more grunt work on me, more last-minute fire drills. I accepted it all with a calm smile, while inside I was laughing. Because every late-night scramble only proved my theory this company was bloated blind and unprepared for the future. And when I left, I wouldn't just be leaving a gap. I'd be taking the very foundation they stood on. There was one night I'll never forget. I was alone in the office long after everyone else had gone home, staring at the glowing city skyline through the glass. My notebook lay open, filled with sketches and plans, and I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The safety net I thought this company provided had already been cut. I had nothing left to lose and everything to build. So I kept my head down. I played the long game. I smiled in meetings, congratulated Jason on his vision, and quietly prepared the empire that would one day make his title meaningless. They thought they'd sidelined me. What they didn't know was that I was laying the groundwork to buy the very floor under their feet. And one day soon, I would. The launch of my startup wasn't flashy. No confetti cannons, no viral ads, just a small press release, a quiet demo for a handful of clients I'd known for years, and a team of people who believed in me more than my old company ever did. But what happened next was nothing short of electric. Within weeks, word spread. Our product wasn't just good, it solved the problems my old company had been ignoring for years. Clients who had once complained to me in hushed tones over conference calls now called me directly. They didn't want Band-Aid fixes anymore. They wanted the solution I had built. The growth was explosive. Month after month, revenue doubled. We expanded our team, hired the very engineers who had once felt stuck in the shadows like I had, and built a culture that valued skill over appearances. Investors who had once brushed me off now scrambled to get in on the deal. Meanwhile, my old company stumbled. Their fresh energy leadership floundered in the face of shifting markets. Products were delayed, clients left in frustration, and costs ballooned under Jason's so-called vision. On the surface, they pretended everything was fine, polished press releases, staged photos of smiling executives, but behind closed doors, I knew they were bleeding. And then came the call. It was from a banker I knew. He told me almost sheepishly that my old company was considering strategic options. Translation, they were desperate. The stock was tanking, investors were restless, and they needed a lifeline. I didn't laugh. I didn't even smile. I just said, "Tell me what it would take." The negotiations dragged for weeks, but the outcome was inevitable. My startup had become the shark in the water, and their company was floundering prey. When the final papers were signed, it hit me like a quiet thunderclap. I now owned the company that had once told me I was too old to lead. The day the deal was announced, I walked back into that glass-walled office where I had once sat invisible, reading the email that broke me. Except this time, I wasn't an employee. I wasn't waiting for someone else's decision about my future. I was the one signing the checks. Jason was gone, of course. He'd been quietly pushed out months before, after one too many failed launches. The CEO, who had once preached about fresh energy, had retired early, citing family reasons. But I knew the truth. They'd bet everything on youth and image and lost to the very experience they had dismissed. Standing in that boardroom, I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The victory wasn't in humiliating them. It was in knowing that every slight, every dismissal, every time they told me I was past my prime had led to this moment. They thought I was too old to be promoted. Instead, I became their boss. And when the ink dried on the contract, the company wasn't just mine, it was proof. Proof that experience isn't a weakness. That resilience beats arrogance. That underestimating someone like me was the most expensive mistake they'd ever make. The news made headlines for a week. Veteran entrepreneur buys out former employer. Some outlets framed it as a Cinderella story, others as a cautionary tale of corporate arrogance. For me, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about walking into that building, once my cage, now my company, and realizing I didn't feel bitterness anymore. Revenge had fueled me in the beginning. Yes. Every late night at my kitchen table, every spreadsheet, every pitch deck, I carried the sting of being told I was too old. But when the deal was done, I realized the real victory wasn't in crushing them. It was in creating something bigger than they ever believed I could. Because the truth is, I didn't just buy a company. I rewrote the rules for what leadership could look like. I rebuilt the culture from the inside out. Gone were the shallow metrics of who looked the part, who fit the mold of fresh energy. In their place, I created an environment where experience wasn't sidelined, it was prized. Where 20-somethings and 50-somethings sat at the same table, trading insights like equals. Where mentorship flowed both ways, and no one was dismissed because of how many candles were on their birthday cake. For my team, it meant opportunity. The people who had once been overlooked now thrived. Engineers who had been trapped fixing mistakes in the shadows became innovators. Analysts who had been told to let the younger voices lead finally had their ideas taken seriously. Watching them flourish was more satisfying than any balance sheet. For me, it meant freedom. I no longer lived in fear of being restructured out of relevance. I didn't have to justify my worth to anyone. I set my own vision, my own pace. And with every milestone we hit, I felt a piece of myself heal the parts that had been chipped away by years of dismissive nods and overlooked contributions. But the biggest surprise was what it meant for my family. For years, they had seen me come home, exhausted, half present, pouring everything into a company that never valued me back. Now I came home energized, proud, excited to tell them about the future we were building. My children didn't just see me as someone who worked hard, they saw me as someone who refused to be defined by other people's limits. Looking back, I don't regret the years I spent at that old company. Those years gave me the experience, the scars, the fuel. They underestimated me. And in doing so, they handed me the sharpest weapon I could have asked for: motivation. So yes, they once called me too old for promotion. But I'll tell you what age really gave me: clarity, patience, resilience, the courage to walk away from someone else's table and build my own. And when I look at the thriving business we've built, when I see the faces of my team proud and unafraid, I know this wasn't just revenge, it was legacy.